My name is Liam Wickham, and I am the founder of Game-Production.com, where we seek to enable games industry professionals to plan better, lead better, and stop the crunch culture through building a community of support, knowledge, and training. Today, we're very excited to have Renee Wooten as our guest. Renee has probably the best list of testimonials on LinkedIn I've ever seen, reflecting her passion for team building, as well as her obvious enthusiasm and drive to learn. She has a keen interest in accessibility and inclusion, as well as solid experience with customer and community-facing roles. After gaining a game design BSc from Full Sail University, she started her inevitable climb towards production stardom with Kings Isle Entertainment, based in Austin, Texas. Kings Isle are the creators of Wizard 101 and Pirate 101, which together have garnered over 50 million registered players. Renee has worked on the live service MMO Wizard 101 for the last 3.5 years. Good afternoon, Ms. Renee Wooten.
Hello, it's really great to have this opportunity, so thank you for your time. And it's great to experience this, and I really appreciate the initiative that you're making with this as well.
That's very kind and flattering of you, and I will take that to my heart. Thank you. So what we normally do, as you know, hopefully, is I normally give a little summary, which I've just done, and then ask you to talk a little bit about yourself and where you've come from and where you're going to. So if you're up for it, should we do that next?
Yes. So as you had mentioned in that lovely summary about me, I started in customer support, and I did go to school for game design. I get the question a lot why I kind of pivoted over to production as a role. I started in customer support and kind of got familiar with the game's inner workings and everything like that, and wanted to be in systems design specifically because I really like numbers and spreadsheets and things like that. And an opportunity came up at Kings Isle for an associate producer, and I read the job description, and I was like, wow, I really could do all of those things, and pretty excited about it. And so when I interviewed for that opportunity, I've never had an interview where I've been more excited about the position after interviewing for it. And so I was like, this might be something that would work really well for me. And so when I got the opportunity to be an associate producer, I noticed that I actually thrive here because of a combination of my soft skills, specifically empathy and being able to listen and also kind of have my ear to the ground. But my game design background, when it comes to like my knowledge about the game industry as a whole, actually benefited like kind of having my ear to the ground and making those critical decisions that a producer often has to do.
So that was a very brief summary. Thank you. I like it though, and I want to just come back to something that I said in the introduction about you, which is some of these LinkedIn testimonials, which are frankly insane and must have cost you quite a bit of money. But for example,
I agree.
here's one. Renee transcends the role of producer. Her warmth, compassion, and patience lift the spirit and dampen the turbulent milestone. She is a bold, brave, and heroic champion of the team. She fearlessly confronts conflict with the heart of a warrior. She is the producer every developer wishes they had. I'm glad I do. Now that's probably the best testimonial I've ever read in my life. So firstly, really sincere congratulations that anyone would bring themselves to word such a thing. And I really mean that. Because it's the kind of testimonial I think every producer would want, right? Because it sums up a lot of what you have just talked about. Bold and brave, you didn't specifically say, but we know that those are traits that producers need. You said that you were empathic and could listen, and of course that means that you can handle conflict, and the warmth and the compassion and all of that. So I just wonder how much do you think you brought into this role through your natural personality, and how much have you adapted and learnt that through the years before you became a producer?
That's a great question. So I think I brought a lot of kind of renewed energy into the team since the project has been around. I mean, it's been Wizard specifically has been in development for over 15 years now, and of course released in 2008. So we actually have a lot of tenured people on that particular team. So of course, like, they might have ideas of like, oh, it's always worked this way, or they haven't been given the opportunities that they may have wanted, or had felt like they had a voice at any particular time to make an influence on decisions. And so me being able to understand, because like my first year as an associate producer, I very much like went in just wanting to be a sponge. And so I was like, okay, well, how does this work? I mean, I sat with the sound team, the art team, the design team, and just tried to get a better understanding of what their day-to-day was, because that would also help me facilitate what needs that they have, and also understand when they give me an estimate of how long it would take them to accomplish something, I could understand where that estimate comes from and what kind of obstacles and walls that I need to tear down to make sure that they can put out the best quality content that they can. And so that my personality of just being a sponge and willingness to learn kind of helped me be that sounding board, and then also propose potential solutions. The particular person that left that review is one of our principal animators, and he had an issue that had been going on for years, and I heard about it, and I talked to one of our programmers, and it would take a couple of hours to make that change. And I got that change done, and it's not only like improved the productivity for the animating team, but that's something that they needed for years, and they just hadn't had the opportunity to get that done, because, as you know, production's a moving train that you can't stop, right? So you got to kind of figure out how to navigate those obstacles in real time and figure out where the priorities lie. And sometimes things cannot get addressed as quickly as we may like, but at least having that idea of what to strive for, and keep your end goal in mind. Like, we always want to make sure that things are efficient and effective, and we want the creatives to be able to create and be creative.
That's a lovely answer. And I think, to speak personally, one of the most exciting parts of production when I first started was what you've described, that feeling that you've come in and you've looked around and you've gone, well, hang on, we can easily fix half a dozen of these problems that you've got. And to just go and do it, and for everyone to go, you're some kind of wizard. And no, it's fine. No, I just talked to a few people, and I think you're right. It can be a blinkered experience for people who are in, so say you're an animator and you're an animation team and you've been complaining about something for years, and people are just not fixing a thing, and you can just become moany about it and quite disempowered, and suddenly somebody comes along and shines a light on it and fixes it in a day. I think that's a remarkable gift that you have, and I think all producers want to have, right? It's the empowering of your team, which is something that you've mentioned on LinkedIn and elsewhere. But what's your opinion towards empowering teams? What do you think about that?
I think it's very important, because everyone comes from a different background and there's different experiences. And so by giving a voice to the table from the different experiences that everyone can have, it adds depth and kind of that personality to a product that you can only get from the diversity of things. That's why kind of all of the social climate things that are happening right now are very important and long overdue, because you get those different perspectives. There's several situations where, especially working in a predominantly male industry, that you have writers, for example, that are writing for characters that don't look like them, or that in scenarios that they don't even think about. There's plenty of times that we kind of call out in read-throughs where it's like, could we make this maybe a female character, or there's not enough female characters in this, and there's no malicious intent behind those decisions. It's just something that some people don't think about because they don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
So being able to have a diverse team, and then also allowing them to have a voice and empower them to add to the creative process and decision making just makes a more rich and complete product.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always opportunities to grow and change. But I think that's why it's important, because also, like what you're doing with this initiative, knowledge sharing is so important. We could have several designers on the same team and they all operate differently. And if they just communicate with each other, they can be like, oh, I've been doing it this way and your way is so much faster. Or, hey, have you tried this? And you can help with that collaboration and problem solving and just making that quality product shine so much brighter.
Wow, that's a good answer. I think so. I asked about empowerment, but you talked quite a lot about enrichment as well, didn't you? And education. And I think that that's a wonderful part of our jobs, that where we get to break down silos and as you say, perhaps re-educate people in certain areas, but also just to focus on that little part you said about where people talk to each other and go, oh, you've been doing that too. I remember, I mean, I think I've worked practically every place I've worked. That's come up several times, where the worst one, where we had an entire tools team making a tool that the team that lived on the floor below them had already made, and they didn't find out until afterwards. And it's typical, I think, where teams work together and don't really talk to each other. Is your team that you're working with, is it quite large? Do you have those problems where there's people just aren't able to communicate with each other because of scale as much as because of silos?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I guess you could in a way, because we have mobile teams that work separately and also more on agile development. And then we have MMO that is kind of a hybrid between waterfall and agile development.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to, we work also, Unity is heavily used on the mobile team. And then we have kind of an unsupported software, Gamebryo, that we kind of have to have a tools programmer to keep updated and moving forward. So there's not a silo in the aspect of cross-pollination with teams. We do have scenarios where, let's say a designer, for example, wants to put together a tool to make their workflow easier, but might not have contacted other designers to get their input, or they might have asked for that tools request a while ago and the tools programmer starts working on it and there's actually incomplete information or didn't go through a review process as we should have.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely rooms for improvement for communication and involvement and just trying to make sure that we put the best tools out there specifically, just to have that communication. So I think it is definitely one of those things where the designers, for example, communicating amongst each other to get a tool that can work for everyone.
So what's the size of the team?
We have a little bit over 40 in different disciplines altogether. So,
and that's just to do a bit of a dive into the detail. You've got Wizard 101 and Pirate 101. Are you sharing a lot between those two?
Yes, the MMO team primarily works on both titles. We do have Wizard that is getting about 3 updates per year. Typically, we do kind of a world towards the end of the year is kind of the cadence that it's been during its time that it's live. With Pirate 101, we've kind of been maintaining and keeping that going and things like that. It's not something that we constantly actively work on. The team's still very passionate about it, but it is something that we're focusing our efforts on Wizard because of the milestones that it's achieved and things like that.
Okay. So look, we're darting around a bit and it's very interesting, but I want to drag you back kicking and screaming to your story a little bit more about your background, because I know it's not been entirely smooth to become an associate producer. When I asked you about it, you kind of skipped over a few things, which I want to take you back to. So I know that from an early age, you've been working with charities and you've been working with special needs and things like that. you have been that sort of person. Do you think that that has had a direct impact upon your gifts now as a producer? Do you want to talk a little
Absolutely.
bit about that?
Yes. So I've always had a spot in my heart for kind of accessibility and inclusion, and just wanting to see everyone have an opportunity to succeed and also engage in things that other people find joy throughout the world. I mean, video games bring a lot of people a sense of comfort even during difficult times, especially, I mean, look at the situation that we're in right now, going through a pandemic that is affecting the world
Mm-hmm.
at large. And video games have been a great tool for a lot of people to be able to cope. And so, of course, if there's anyone out there that has kind of other obstacles that aren't kind of like the like kind of the standard that games allow, like I've seen controllers be developed for people that have mobility issues and things like that. And I don't say issues as it's an issue, but it's just an obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
And there needs to be more talk about that. And I think because of my exposure with people that might not have opportunities or tools available to them to enjoy certain things, allows me to have that vision. For example, we have a couple of people who are colorblind on the MMO team. And so since Wizard does not have a colorblind mode, unfortunately, and it's a huge level of effort, which we still constantly talk about, I still, when we make new features or new events, I reach out to the people I know who have color blindness to put the feature in front of them. And can you see everything here? Are you able to see everything clearly? Are you able to enjoy this experience how we intend our audience to enjoy this? And it's not a lot. It doesn't take a lot to have that conversation. But the value of it, you can't even put a value on it. It's invaluable. And so it's just taking those extra steps. And I feel like because of the experiences I have with working with special needs and things like that, I have that vision and that kind of awareness.
It's interesting. There's a UK charity called Special Effect, which is a UK gaming charity, and the work they do is incredible. They work across the UK games industry, and loads of people take part in things like sponsored runs and rally drives and things like that to raise money. But they actually go to people who, for example, can't use a controller because something may be not quite right with their hands or something like that, and they'll make a controller for them that they can use, and then they'll show the end results of that. And I think that kind of stuff is quite inspiring, isn't it? And I was reading in some of the gaming forums recently about The Last of Us Part 2, which whatever you might think about The Last of Us Part 2, I know that there's quite a lot of congratulations to them for the accessibility efforts they've put into a AAA game. So I suppose if somebody like that can work on accessibility, there's hope for the rest of us, isn't there?
Yes.
I remember the days of accessibility when I was working on website design, and even back then it was a big deal, which most people ignored. And I think it's something that if people like yourself and others aren't talking about it, it's very easy to fall underneath the radar, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very important too. So of course we don't actively think of things that don't affect us, right? You have to actually take an effort to understand and kind of put yourself in someone else's shoes. And that's where diversity and inclusion also has an impact, because of course I can be aware of colorblindness, but I don't know how that impacts someone that's colorblind because I don't experience that. So it was important that I had resources available to me, such as my coworkers that do have colorblindness, to put that in front of them to work together to figure out how to make this accessible to as many people as possible. And I don't typically believe that there's no way to satisfy everyone's needs. I know there's a big discussion about kind of difficulty in games. Unfortunately, Dark Souls is kind of the big ticket item that gets kind of thrown into there because it's constantly compared to difficulty. And so there is a way to just be aware. And of course, games, like, some people want their games to be challenging. So there is still space for a challenging game. It's just that accessibility and also being able to experience it, which I think is also a great thing about like Twitch and YouTube and things like that. Platforms where I might not be as skillful at a game, but I can kind of experience it with a community and see the mechanics of that game and experience that, even if I'm not like good at the game. Like I don't play Fortnite, for example, but I'm very familiar with Fortnite, and I've watched content creators play Fortnite, so I could see like, oh, that's a really interesting mechanic and things like that. So that's why I think accessibility is definitely important, but also representation and going to the source and getting input directly from the people that experience that is so important.
Thank you. So you've now been a producer 3.5 years. And I'm going to ask you this question. Is life as a producer what you expected? If so, how? If not, how so?
So I didn't know much about what production was like when I first entered the video game industry. I was very focused on design. And so I did a lot of research when I saw that job listing. And I would say that it's more than I expected, because I saw the bullet points in the job listing as like, okay, these soft skills like communicating and facilitating and scheduling and just being able to communicate with all stakeholders like that, that's something that I communicate with tons of different people just being in customer support. So I knew that I'd be able to do that. What is more about production is kind of the influence that I have on the product. There's a lot of decisions that have been made that have kind of been driven by my input. And that's so incredible to me, and something that I wouldn't have thought would be. I mean, especially updating the front end of a game that is beloved by millions of players, that's terrifying.
It certainly is. Yeah.
So, of course, having that conversation where it's like, hey, we're turning 10. Like, is there any big plans for us to turn 10? Because, of course, even before I joined the team, they were talking about, like, I would love to revisit that, because we have a lot of artists that worked on the original environments and original characters in the front end of the game. And they're like, our skills have gotten so much better. I would love to showcase these skills and revisit the front end of the game. And that conversation's always been happening. And so I was like, there's nothing better than the 10th anniversary, big, huge milestone for this product. Let's see what it would take for us to do this. And the fact that I went to our creative director at the time and executive producer and was like, this is what I think would be a great direction for the game, and that it was actually listened to and we actually went forward with it. And also to see the excitement and success of that was just, it's something that I'm like, I didn't think that I would have an impact like that at all. Enough so that they made a character named after me, and with a pun. I've been made fun of my last name my entire life, and then they make something clever like Wooten because I'm a dog lover. It's incredible.
And they give you a hard hat.
Yeah. A construction woman. Of anything. Yes. I mean, a male dominant field too. And that's impactful, because look at the women that are and girls that are probably diving into Wizard 101, seeing, like, of course we use like more like anamorphic characters, right? But they can still like see themselves in these characters of like, oh, it's not a gruff, like, man in this construction role. It's actually like a female. Yeah, it's a dog, but like they could relate to that in some way, and it could inspire them somehow. Like it kind of breaks that mold.
Yeah, that's great. And the part about your creative input and the leadership you chose there. I mean, if you've heard any of the other podcast episodes, you know that there is a bit of a trend towards talking about the producer as having that creative input or needing to have that creative input to do their job effectively. Is that something that you agree with?
I absolutely do agree with it. I didn't know that was a part of the role or how impactful that was until, of course, I experienced it. But seeing that and also being very happy that KingsIsle gives that environment to where you do have a seat at the table and that impact, but it also makes a better product. And like I had mentioned before, and I think it's valuable because a producer also knows the inner workings and knows the dependencies and how these decisions, like kind of the big picture. The big picture is always good, but you also need to know like what pieces lead up to that big picture. And since you have that unique perspective in production, you can make informed and logical decisions and kind of have a plan before you take on that. I'm not going to say that us updating the front end of the game didn't come with the challenges that we didn't really plan for example, but I think because of that know-how and the knowledge and also the skill of the team, we were able to face those obstacles head on. So
that's leadership, isn't it? I mean, you were up for the challenge and the team came with you because you were leading them and inspiring them. So that's leadership and that's wonderful. So I say that's wonderful only because it's difficult, right? And it's a lot of producers would find that very difficult to do, a couple of months after they joined because it's quite a big risk that you're taking on for yourself, right? It's responsibility. And I wonder, I'm kind of delving into this because I'm wondering if you think you could have done that if you had not done your game design BSc.
No. If I didn't have the knowledge of the industry and kind of how the pitch process works and game design documents and just kind of that whole brainstorming process, I don't know that I would have had kind of the language, like speak the language of a creative director and how to pitch how this was impactful and just the overall understanding of how games are created. I think my drive for game development as a whole definitely prepared me to have that conversation.
If we look again at how life's changed for you, let's do it this way. What does a day in the life look like for you now?
So it changes day by day. There's a little bit of a structure. So of course I very heavily go through Jira and make sure everyone's tasked, that there's no roadblocks, everyone's logging their work and that we're still trending towards our deliverables. So that's kind of the foundation of my day-to-day role and something that I need to do. And of course, depending on what I discover in my regular checks is going to be, okay, do I need to facilitate a meeting to make some decisions? Do I need to fix any roadblocks or ask anyone, is there like, what stopped you from being able to deliver this? Or do you feel you're at risk to deliver this? And kind of get those conversations going. And also the uniqueness of working on a live MMO is also work with community, the community manager. Hey, how is the player sentiment going on right now? Is everything like, is there anything we need to address? Are there any like glaring bugs that have come up on live that we need to address? And the unique thing right now, I know I had briefly mentioned to you in our email exchange that we just released our summer milestone for this year on our test realm, which is our testing environment. So players can go in and finally take a look at what we've been working on. And so that adds another level of kind of granularity when it comes to, okay, this is a testing environment. They're probably going to find a lot of bugs. We're trying to squash them before we put this live to several more players. I mean, the test environment, which seems to be kind of the same from product to product, like, and the player size on a test environment is much smaller than a live environment. you have kind of your dedicated players that are interested in seeing the new and improved things first. And so you get that feedback, that very small sample size. And then you go, like, we want to get as much right before we go to that live environment, because even after you go live, there might be things that fall through the cracks, or players are very clever in the fact that they see, they find things that you might not have thought of, or
That's their
they
job,
found
right?
a loophole. Yeah. Because the player base is always going to be larger than a QA team to tackle that, right? So you have the more people, the more creative you get. I mean, that kind of solidifies the whole, like, having people, empowering people to have those conversations, because you see those perspectives and people think differently because of that. So it's, my day-to-day changes based on what's going on, whether we have a test environment or we just put out a new product, or if we're in the beginning of a milestone. But traditionally, it's what can I do to facilitate and allow creatives to be creative and put their best foot forward.
What you just said about the feedback in beta that you would get. So you often find that the people who come to those are the most verbose and have the strongest opinions one way or the other about things. How do you deal with that sort of triage of feedback, where you know where you should probably listen and where you probably shouldn't listen, even though there's a lot of people who might think a thing? How do you deal with that for your community?
So we definitely have, I mean, I think this is true across anything, but definitely having a product that's 12 years old, you have players that have been with you since the beginning. And some of our players have grown up with this product. So, of course, making changes, I mean, I'll use the example of updating the front of the game. Change is scary. And so you have a lot of people that are worried about their nostalgia. And so we kind of went into that knowing, because, I mean, luckily we have a lot of tenured people on the team that also have that attachment to the game and the essence of Wizard. And so we have a very delicate approach. So when players do come in with the kind of attachment and high emotion and upset, we kind of just listen to that, and that's a sounding board, right? So you kind of let those frustrations out, and then you kind of try to pick out the nuggets. Okay, they make a good point here, we should look into that. Or like, for example, our summer update right now, we're kind of updating the player models now. The models kind of stuck out as a sore thumb when we put them against the updated environments. And of course, the players are a whole nother thing, because you connect with your character. Like, you go through this journey with this character. So of course, that's kind of more intimidating than touching environments in a way. So kind of listening to that, like, oh, the lines on the face are too dark, or that makes the player look older. We take those nuggets of that feedback and we address it, like, oh, we didn't really look at it that way. That's great. So just finding the nuggets in that feedback and kind of trying to wade through, because the emotional response is also very valid. But of course, saying something is bad or you don't like it is not constructive enough to where we can formulate an actionable item. And of course, we have to weigh, like, okay, if we do find an actionable item, is it the action that the team wants to take? Because at the end of the day, we are the professionals that make the decision, but we are very delicate in those, and understand the attachment and how important this is. So it's just finding that nugget and working with that.
That's interesting though, because I've had I've been fortunate with experiences with companies and games where the game has been developed over many years, such as RuneScape, and these games have been going on, and quite similar story to yours, I suppose, in terms of the time it's been around, etc. And you get the sense that the people on the team who have been there a while, and indeed the producers, become the guardians. They're like the guardians of the game on behalf of the community, but also on behalf of the company, because they know that the company needs to keep going and keep growing and keep changing along a very carefully thought out route. So I really do understand what you're saying, and I think you've put it in a very nice way. And perhaps because we are going in this direction anyway, we should just pause for an instant, because we're talking about Wizard 101 like everybody will know what it was. But let's sort of continue to dive into Wizard. Do you want to give a brief summary of what it is?
Absolutely. So Wizard 101 is a massive multiplayer online game for the PC. It came out in 2008, and the premise is you are a wizard that has 7 different schools of magic that you can learn in the Ravenwood School of Magic. And it's kind of a card-based game where your spells are cards and you play them, and it casts an animation, which makes it very unique. And it's more of a turn-based gameplay where you have strategic opportunities, but it's rich in story, and it's also fully voiced and has text with dialogue as well, which makes it accessible. And I think that contributed to the success of it. So it kind of had a boost in popularity around 2011, 2012. And so we rapidly made worlds and content and tried keeping up with that success. And we started having commercials. I remember seeing Nickelodeon commercials of it. And so it was just this big experience. I think a lot of it had to do with like wizards were a very popular thing at the time,
Sure.
Because of Harry Potter and things like that. So it's just an experience where you can play with your friends and your family. We've actually been reached out that a lot of family members play with their kids, grandparents with grandkids that aren't in the house and things like that. So it's just a wonderful experience, rich story, and strategic gameplay that's also a slower pace. So you don't have to quickly make actions. It's kind of like a Zen-like experience.
Because I went to have a look, and I hadn't realized that it's aimed to be a child-safe place as well, right? So it's from quite a young age onwards, isn't it, with family, like you say. Which brings its own complexities, doesn't it? Because you have to be constantly aware of child protection and how you do things. And I remember working on other projects which had similar issues, and it adds quite a lot to the production load, doesn't it?
It sure does, yes.
Tell us a bit.
Because, so our QA team, for example, when we introduce new names of characters or new names of places or even new names of gear, they do a Google search because they assume that the players are going to Google it, and we don't want them to potentially Google something that we wouldn't want a younger audience to see. So that is a very interesting thing that I didn't even know working in customer support. I learned that very shortly into my production role. And so that actually changed my way of thinking too. When I would read scripts and be in read-throughs, I'd be like, okay, I'm not familiar with that word. Let me think what that would be, so we can kind of safeguard that. And because QA is like the line of defense. And sometimes when something gets to QA, it might be harder to change it because it's later in the development cycle. So it's good to have kind of that awareness. Another thing that's interesting is kind of the chat logs. So we do allow, we do allow chat logs and things like that where you can communicate. I mean, obviously in an MMO, you really do need to rely on communication and teamwork and more difficult battles. So we have 3 different chat options. The default one is kind of a text chat with pre-selected like phrases and answers that we put in. So you can still do like, can you help me with this quest? Can you help me go here? And will you be my friend? And things like that. And then we have like true friend codes and those restrictions. There's parental permissions that parents can log in and set up their own passwords so they can put the chat restrictions as well. And then there's a text chat where you can have freedom of text, but we have like a blacklist of words that we do not allow you to say. And so an open chat, which gives you a little bit more freedom. It's mostly allowing you to use numerical stuff, because of course you can make some very interesting and clever combinations with numbers to say the naughty things that you want
Shocking,
to say.
but true.
Yes. And so, and we've learned, I mean, we're still adding to that blacklist because language and things like that is constantly evolving with new trends and things like that, but also players finding more clever ways to say things. So it is a delicate process, and also we do rely on player feedback for those particular things as well, so we can make sure that it's a safe and accepting place, because there's even words that are accepted now. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this or not. So like gay, for example, which of course talking about any individual in just a matter of fact way of stating that this person is gay is not inherently bad, but it does have a stigma of being used as a derogatory term to diminish people. So we just don't allow that word to be said. And lately, we've had a lot of people come back and say, why can't we say this? Like, I want to talk about my identity, and it's important to me. And while we agree with that, we just have to be very careful, because does the positive use outweigh the way people are going to abuse that word?
This question that I like to ask, you've probably heard it before, but do you feel vital to the overall effort of keeping the game fresh? Do you ever feel like a spare part?
Fortunately, I have never felt like a spare part. I definitely do think I have a vital role into keeping the game relevant and up to date, and mainly because I love video games. So this isn't something that I use kind of leadership and manager tools exclusively. I also play other games. For example, I knew when we updated the front end of the game that, hey, players like taking a lot of screenshots of like their experiences with their friends, or they defeated a difficult boss. And a lot of games started adding kind of a photography mode into it. I mean, at the time, Nintendo had just re-released Wind Waker HD, and they put in the Pictobox mode and things like that. So I kind of was like, we should also allow them to take pictures and have a free floating camera, because we restrict the use of the camera so they can't like break the game for themselves and get stuck. But if we can have kind of more of a free range camera, they can make more unique pictures. And then we also use that as an effort to share amongst the community, so we could have that involvement and enrich that experience with community. I'm able to kind of problem solve too. If we want to put in a new feature, there's a lot of times that I'll speak up and be like, there's a feature similar to this in this title, and this is how they've updated this, or this is how they navigated that issue. Or even if it's a feature, oh, I experienced that feature in this game, and this is why it didn't work. Or why it doesn't seem to fit in this particular scenario. So I definitely feel like there's a vital sense. And of course, my game knowledge and kind of my ear to the ground, so to speak, definitely helps me be a vital person in that process.
It's interesting. So do you think that your experience with gaming and your subjective sort of views of what should happen, do you think that they are as important as like data-driven decision making? Do you have data decision-driven making? Do you have access to a lot of data? I imagine you could have.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have made huge efforts in the past couple of years to make more data-driven decisions, and the whole team has witnessed the value of that. So we actually went through and we combed through, like we saw players getting stuck on certain quests. And then when we dove into them, we realized these quests are too difficult or they're too tedious. I mean, of course, the early development of MMOs, you put in kind of filler content of like, go collect 10 of these things. And now, since, I mean, not just gaming, but the internet, you're fighting for a consumer's time.
Yeah.
essentially. So, of course, no one wants to invest anymore or even has the time to invest anymore into those kind of tedious tasks. And so we've even reduced some of the like collect quests from 10 to 3 and made like major changes like that, because content's not an issue with our game anymore, because we're up to, I think it's 19 worlds now. So we have plenty of content. So of course, when Wizard First was released, we needed that content to kind of extend the gameplay time. But now we don't necessarily have that obstacle anymore, and we want players to experience the content that we have. And so data definitely influences a lot of excellent decisions. I do think there's a delicate balance between the kind of data doesn't paint the full picture, right? There's still a lot of assumptions that can come in, because I mean, that's what that was, an assumption of, oh, players are dropping off right here. It could be a million things. It could be they weren't interested anymore, or they just stopped playing organically. They didn't have time. Their computer broke. But of course, we came to the consensus after digging in ourselves and was like, look, we can make this change. And the great thing is we can validate that with going back to the data to see if it did move the needle. But of course, there is a lot of benefit. I mean, data couldn't have told us if updating the front end of the game was a bad idea, because I mean, it's limited. We'd never done that before, so we don't have that data. Of course, we did look at games like World of Warcraft, for example, the backlash that they had when they updated their game or changed it, to see if like, what risks are we running with this? And you still have to kind of make that decision and see if you, I mean, sometimes you're going to make decisions and it wasn't the right decision. And the best thing you can do is learn from it and just try to make the most informed decision that you can.
That's a great answer. Data plus human.
Yes.
Yes. I think you've partly answered this already, but how much of your job is project management and what form does it take?
I say it definitely varies with production duties and project management. So, of course, if we're in the middle of a milestone and things like everything's kind of been scoped out, that's probably when I have the most project management, because I don't have to kind of plan the milestone out and get those estimates. We're kind of we're sailing at that point.
Yeah.
And so we're just trying to keep the maintenance up and also make sure that everybody has what they need. So I'd say kind of in the beginning of like the planning phase for what we're going to do for a future milestone is heavily producer. And then it kind of like, it shifts in scale a little bit of like, okay, now that we've gotten away from the dock, we're moving towards and sailing as a project manager, if you will.
Yeah.
So it's very fluid and it shifts. I like to think that I have kind of a fluctuating responsibility and cross-functional disciplines. I definitely try to throw myself at things that I know I can be helpful and try to move things out of the way. I mean, I actually have a design credit in Pirate because we had a tight deadline and I quickly learned how to implement mounts into the game. And so because of that, I got to actually have my first design credit, which was awesome.
Congratulations.
So, thank you.
Just to delve into that a little bit then, when you're talking about milestones, are you involved in both content production and features being created?
Yeah, I'd say they're very closely related in how our team operates. Usually we have a cadence for content creation. So we kind of have a roadmap and know kind of what the expectations are. And we very rarely deviate from that plan.
Is it story-based still?
Yes.
Okay.
Especially our end of the year content is usually a mixture of kind of quality of life and then a world. So we heavily focus on the content towards the end of the year, just because, I mean, simply that's the longest development. I mean, that's the biggest initiative that we do for the year. We do about 3 updates per year, and right now is the cadence. And the spring milestone is definitely like, what can we do that's fun and exciting? Lately, we've been adding more events. So players have something to do, even if they've reached end of content, they have something that they can come back to and also prepare and make their character stronger to prepare for that content. But also it's available for all players. It's not put against a level restriction. But then we focus on kind of quality of life as well when it comes to, we could optimize this. And also players have been wanting this for a while and things like that. It's kind of an opportunity to reset. So we kind of plan all of that together as a leadership team. Mm-hmm. So it's not just me and the lead producer sitting in a room. It's usually me, the lead producer, and all of the leads for every discipline, so we can get an idea of like, what is this level of effort? And then we kind of pitch it to see if it fits and that it's a direction that we want to go.
How do you, if you were to strip away the content, how do you do the planning of what's left? Is that what you've just described?
Yes. Okay. So we go through and kind of like, what journey do we want the players to go on next, essentially?
But do you have to do a lot of work on the game itself in terms of its infrastructure and core new features that you need to introduce to fundamentally improve things or remove technical debt? Do you have to do all that sort of stuff as well? Or is it quite dormant? And you do? Okay.
Yeah, the technical debt is definitely heavily in like spring and summer milestones, because usually we have to make way for kind of new gameplay or puzzles that we want to put within the story content. Is usually where tech goes for kind of later in the year. But yes, our tech debt is definitely something we focus on heavily kind of in the beginning of the year.
Spring cleaning. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because you have the same people, I imagine, who are working on assisting with content and assisting with features and removing tech debt and tech investment, that sort of thing. And it's quite an interesting challenge, I think, that is reasonably new for producers, I think. I don't think it's a thing. If you look at traditional games, make a game, ship it, move on, that was kind of become make a game, ship it, do some DLC. Whereas now it's kind of like, make a game, right, so how long can we keep it going for? How big can we build our community, and how, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that has changed the nature of a lot of production, mobile or non-mobile. I think it's a very interesting new challenge that people face, because it's difficult to look at that world, and you mentioned this earlier, as a purely, say, agile world, waterfall world, or stage-gated world, or lean Kanban world. It is a hybrid, isn't it? How do you deal with that, with the hybrid methodologies? How do you track work in a hybrid world?
Definitely so the way Jira is set up, it's an agile tool, right? So of course we have our own obstacles of waterfall development with, instead of sprints being a few weeks at a time, we have to take months. And so the way that we kind of mitigate that and kind of find those issues early on, instead of working for months and then realizing issues, we kind of do like feature strike teams and try to make sure that the conversation's always going and kind of get an update on what's going on. And we've also recently started doing kind of feature reviews. So especially if we have a programmer, for example, working on some UI, they have wireframes to work on, but once it goes into practice, it's like, okay, is this still the vision that we want? Is this still working? Or even if there was an obstacle and it's like, okay, this can't work the way that we wanted it to in the time allotted, let's figure out like a workaround, or do we need to determine that the time is warranted and we need to take that additional time? So it's just kind of adopting agile methodologies with like the strike teams and stand-ups and having people on the same page and kind of giving status updates and constantly having that communication instead of just moving forward with, oh, it'll be delivered in a few months, and we definitely cannot work it as a set it and forget it.
So you expose the review of your work internally. Do you also expose it externally in the form of, you were talking about betas earlier, but do you find yourself like booking in time with a very small group of players that you trust and showing things to them at a very early stage?
We've actually dabbled in that recently, and we're still trying to navigate the best way to do that. So we've been talking a lot about PvP just because the PvP community is very vocal because it's end of content stuff. And
it's PvP.
Also, yeah, and it's PvP.
Which makes them vocal.
But, and so, of course, they see that a lot of our content, especially the events, are heavily focused on like, what can you do like casually instead of competitively. And so we've kind of dabbled in that a little bit and trying to figure out how can we get a subset of players to kind of give us their feedback, tell us what it's like to be a PvP player on the ground. And we have like beacons in the community that we've reached out to. Some of our content creators heavily focus on PvP, and we decided that that was the best direction to try. And I think definitely with that initiative that we're probably going to do that even more. We do teasers with content creators, but that's pretty late into the development process where it's kind of like solidified that we know that this feature is going to go out. And so I look forward to future initiatives where we put it in front of players before so they can have that huge influence up front instead of having to potentially change something later and essentially being blindsided. So we're kind of in early stages with that. We haven't historically done that before.
It's really interesting though, isn't it? Because if you have the kind of game where it's story-based and you put a lot of effort into content, you try and creating new things, plus you're trying to maybe create a new story with new characters and things to do, and you're using new features to say, hey, we've now improved the way we do whatever, waypoints or AI interactions or something. You tie all of that together, that's a lot of effort. And to try and use your lean startup methodology of, well, after a week, we're going to get that out to players. It's very difficult, isn't it? In a way that if you're just making quite a simple mobile game, you can actually do that. But I think I do see that as a great challenge for our industry generally, especially if you wind back to a AAA game in which you're trying to keep it secret for 3 years and just hoping people will buy it, which of course is why you reduce risk by making sequels. But I think it's a challenge, a very difficult one to overcome if you especially with the kind of thing that you're doing. I wouldn't know how to overcome it myself. I think what you're talking about sounds incredibly logical. And of course, the fewer people you show it to, the more biased their response is going to be, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was just like your question earlier about like how do you disseminate the feedback from players and kind of take out those nuggets. You run into that same obstacle if you put something new or different in front of a sample size of players. You have to understand that they're also not the voice of everyone. And so you just try to take that and figure out, I mean, at the end of the day, like I said before, the professionals make the decisions and they can make mistakes too. And we need to be open to that possibility and risk. But it is valuable when you have someone that dives into the game for years on end there and have the time to dabble in that. They probably do experience different things in a different lens than the developers do.
And I think this is where it makes your experience quite unique amongst others who haven't had the honor really of working on a game that's around that long, because you start to realize the community's very precious. And it takes me back to what I said about using the word of guardians. You become guardians, and I go back again to what people said about you. Your warmth, compassion, and patience lift the spirit and dampen the turbulent milestone. And I imagine with the kind of attitude you've got, the turbulent milestone in which you're trying to sort of listen to the right messages amidst the noise. That's something that it's difficult to learn, isn't it? It's difficult to learn to dampen the noise and pick out what to do and what not to do, right? So
Absolutely.
Do you have any advice for other producers who are facing a lot of noise as they near milestones?
Yeah, definitely. I would say take a step back and remember the goal. Make sure to remember to breathe, because it is going to be overwhelming when you're so passionate about something that you're worried about how it's going to be perceived, or it's not highly liked as you anticipated. Just know that no one's angry at you. Try not to take it so personally, and kind of also trust yourself too, because I know a lot of people that put a lot of effort and love into their craft, and they see someone that doesn't like it. There could be like 10 people to that one that do like it. And also trust that you are a professional and that you made those decisions, and trust in what you're great at. And of course, I personally take everything as a learning opportunity. So even if I did do something well, or something I pushed on was a success or well received, I still am like, okay, well, how can I improve this process to do better the next time? Or if there is, like, for example, with the characters look older and we didn't intend that, and we can go through that. It's like, okay, well, if we ever do anything in the future kind of like this, we at least know to look out for that in the future. So like, even if we added new faces or something like that, we'd be like, okay, that wasn't well received, or anything like that.
Do you do any kind of retros around that sort of thing?
Kind of like a retrospective?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you ever get, like, do the milestone, get the feedback in, throw together a bit of a retro or whatever you want to call it, a post-mortem, whatever you want to call it, and just build up your knowledge base of stuff that you better not touch and things where things went well, and sort of feed that into what's going to happen next.
Absolutely. And those are incredibly important, because it's the same thing where different disciplines see the milestone differently. So, of course, updating the front end of the game was heavily art related. So maybe the tech team or the design team didn't see the same obstacles that the art team did. So having those reflective periods of time where it's like, okay, well, now we know that that's an obstacle that we need to move, or everything's moving so fast. So an individual might hold back their feedback or their feelings of what's going on until things calm down. And so that's an opportunity for you to kind of take a step back, take a breath, and observe, like, okay, what did we do well? What did we need improvement on? And what have we learned from this overall experience? And the value of that cannot be measured, because we could, this takes longer, let's figure out how to do this, or hey, we did great on this, let's go ahead and make this a standard practice. And so that way we can, because in milestones too, you take that risk of like, let's try something new, and sometimes that something new works really well, and you don't want to come around a few milestones later, which would be a few months later, and totally forget that you do that. So setting that in and setting those standards and kind of refining the process and making it kind of like a living process very much helps to make a better product. I think that's probably why sequels sometimes have an opportunity to outshine the very first one, because you have that foundation to work on. You learned a lot of things in the first iteration. And so then those obstacles are out of the way. So you just go ahead and keep improving that product.
That's a very interesting perspective. And I suppose you were reminding me as you talked of continuous improvement, of course, and CI/CD and all that sort of thing, which is something that you can take from Agile methodology, even if you can't take everything, right? It's just as an attitude and as a philosophy. How do you form good relationships with the teams and with the discipline leads? Now, we have talked about this a bit, but I'd be more interested in advice that you could give other producers, especially new producers. How do you form those good relationships, and what are the danger signs?
I'd say the best way to approach forming meaningful relationships is talking to individuals about what they do in their role, because especially in a creative environment such as the video game industry, most people working on the ground are doing it because it's a passion of theirs. So if you allow people to shine and share with you the passion, that immediately comes through in the conversation with them. So, and that kind of has two benefits. You get to learn the individual and kind of how they think and how they communicate and things like that. Because you might have someone that's more shy or is not a small talk situation and things like that. But also understanding what their role is allows you to understand like how that affects others, like the dependencies and things like that we briefly touched on before, and helps you be a better producer to understand, okay, this is how well they work, this is how fast they work, this is actually where their expertise lies. And so I'm going to lean on this person for this and have that open communication with them, because you might learn that, yeah, they're an expert at this, but maybe they want to dabble in something different. And so you just open that door of opportunity for them to try something different and kind of gain that different skill. Because I also think it's very important to invest in your team, because you're just going to bring a better product and more knowledge into the entire process.
I could not agree with you more. And I can guarantee if people follow your advice, then they will get some great testimonials on their LinkedIn. But you can save people's jobs, because if they do that, if they start developing their real passions, and they start building on those skills, if the old skills become something that's not needed anymore because the industry changes, bam, they can shift to the things that they're passionate about, and it can be an entirely new experience for them. And I remember a great example where there was a guy who worked in art. He was a really good artist, and he had some personal tragedy in his life, and he decided he wanted something more stable, and he wanted to be a producer, and he wondered if he could be a producer. And I gave him that opportunity, and it really changed a lot for him, and he was absolutely superb, because he knew that he had described to me the kind of passions and skills he had that he wanted to try and show people he could do. And supporting him, when you support a person who's asked you a thing like that, they give it everything they have, don't they?
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is absolutely fantastic. I've got a core question, which is, what is the hardest part of making this game? Now, in your case, I would say, what is the hardest part maybe of producing this game?
I think the most difficult part of producing this game is kind of because it has that foundation and that cadence of what's expected and things like that, and kind of met with we've always done it this way, and kind of we've built a foundation that clearly works because of the longevity of this game. But there are opportunities of adaptation and evolution, especially because games have become more mainstream and more players meet. Like, there's more people playing games, and games are more accepted everywhere. And so those obstacles kind of add on to, hey, we want to make improvements to not only keep people in the game, but also be attractive to other players that may not have experienced this world yet.
If you were to sum up the job of a producer in 3 catchy headlines, what would they be?
I'd say leader by example, voice of reason.
Stick with those 2 if you want.
Yeah. I can say definitely a weakness of mine is catchy headlines.
Sure. And it's probably not a great question, to be honest with you. But I like your answer anyway. So leader by example, and I have been going on about this for a while now, I think with people, but do you think that you have been adequately mentored and trained around leadership as a producer, or the leaps in seniority and how that affects your job, because presumably you are looking to leap in seniority?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. Of course, there is an opportunity with kind of making a more reasonable, like kind of opening up the space to have those. I'm very happy that currently we've implemented in the past 2 years kind of a goals system where we have core company goals and then we can create our own personal goals. And I think that's a wonderful direction that we're taking to kind of focus on, okay, where do your strengths lie? And then what can we work to improve it? And let's go ahead and shape those goals around it. And of course, with constantly being busy and things like that, there needs to be room for that to happen. So we need to be given ample time. And I do believe we're working on that as well, where we have a buffer built in to the schedule on top of what we already did in the nature of development. But having that opportunity and making that time to invest in the employees and be given that direction. So for me personally, I've learned a lot in the aspect of communication up and down the chain of management. I mean, admittedly, when I first started as an AP, my emails would be way too lengthy and put in way too many details that just weren't necessary. And so I got to learn through not only observing other emails that go out and seeing those experiences, but also getting that feedback firsthand of, hey, approach your emails this way, or try this out, and things like that. And kind of having that organic mentorship is so incredibly powerful. But I do think there is room, and like you said, as in the industry as a whole, because of course I've networked with a lot of people and kind of I'm hungry to learn. So I always reach out like, how would you handle this situation, just to kind of like measure, because I can look at it all day and criticize myself, but also be like, I think I did that well, but there's always an opportunity I could have done it better. So I think there is room in the industry as a whole to kind of invest and also take the risk on hiring someone more junior and being willing to invest in that person. Linda Carlson said it wonderfully in a PAX South panel that the game industry is so fast paced and moving so quickly that it's more desirable to hire someone that already has the know-how and the skills that they gained somewhere else than to actually take a chance on someone that could end up flourishing and being a better fit for that position. So yes, I do think that there is a lot of room for growth, but I definitely do see the improvement that is slowly happening.
It seems like you're a mentor and a coach yourself, right?
I'm slowly accepting that I have become that role. Yes, I if you haven't noticed, Chris Keeling is a big mentor of mine. Without him, I probably wouldn't be in Austin, Texas, or in the game industry through to his guidance and everything like that. And so it was great. I actually have a coworker that recently started at Kings Isle, started as a fan actually of the game, which was pretty incredible to witness. And she was actually very open with me that like she appreciates my mentorship and views me as kind of that role model. And no one's ever verbalized it to me that way. So I never really kind of viewed it in that perspective. And then I was like, wow, how the tides have turned, that I admire healing so much for the guidance that he's given me and continues to give me. And then to think that I've kind of grown into that for someone else, I can't even describe that feeling.
Yeah, I don't think anyone can describe that feeling when it happens to them. And it takes me back to what you said about leader by example, because of course that's what a leader wants to hear, right? That servant leadership of the agile world is something that you don't really understand until you have that happen to you, and that's a wonderful experience, and I congratulate you for that.
Thank you.
Why would anyone want to be a producer?
I think the best reason you would want to become a producer is because you might not be afforded the opportunities to develop the hard skills that you constantly see on job applications, or you don't know where you want to be. Production kind of is that umbrella that gets to oversee all of the different disciplines and how they work together, and see kind of what skills you, like hard skills you'd want to develop as a professional. But soft skills, those are harder to kind of learn. A lot of times the soft skills that you have are just something you inherently have, either through your life experiences or just the essence of who you are as a person. So I feel like producer is a perfect role for people that have those soft skills that they can leverage and kind of utilize those strengths to kind of inherit other strengths alongside that by seeing kind of the different pipelines and things like that.
That's a great answer. I think I might want to be a producer now. Looking at advice for new producers, which you've just given, you of course have got from Full Sail University an MSc, and I've talked to people previously who have said, look, you're not really going to come out of college or anywhere and just suddenly be a producer, right? You might come out and be in QA and become a producer, or you might, do a design degree and become a producer, and just keep trying until you become one. But people expect producers to already have some of these, like you say, these soft skills, but also a little bit of experience. But if you are a college student and you're blessed with the knowledge that producers exist in the games industry and you quite fancy it, what advice would you give them about how to get there, how to land that first job?
I highly recommend that you start in either customer service or QA, and some people will be lucky to jump right into that. I recommend looking up postmortems. There's some public postmortems from different companies. I know the very first one I kind of dove into was a Darksiders one, and see how other video game studios, like what obstacles they had, how they approached those obstacles, what failures they had. So you can kind of get a glimpse of what game development is like and the difficult things that happen with that giant beast of a responsibility. And also, when you do land either production right from the jump or an entry-level position such as customer service or QA, make sure that you don't stop learning. You definitely want to become an expert in the craft in which you were hired, but utilize that opportunity to kind of learn from all of the experience and talent surrounding you. I actually have a unique story with that. I was in customer support. I started at Kings Island 2013, and we had an unfortunate layoff in 2015, I believe. And of course, you get survivor's guilt, right? That is a very real thing. And of course, that was my empathy was destructive for me. And so what I realized is, while I sat in my little cubicle, kind of sectioned off from the development teams, that I just watched all that talent walk out the door. I did not get out of my cubicle and try to learn design from the designers I was surrounded by, or build those concrete conversations. And that's kind of where, like, it's unfortunate for me that I had to go through such an awful experience that I didn't even get impacted by. But I did definitely say, like, oh, they're so much more capable than me. Why am I here? Which is the survivor's guilt. But I made it a point after that I would put myself out there more. I would communicate. I would try to seek opportunities to shadow other people, because you have a privilege to have your foot in the door. Because a lot of people clamber for those opportunities, and some of them are even people that might have experienced an unfortunate layoff that are going off to get that same position somewhere else. So you're in a constant battle to get into that position. And once you're in that position, never stop learning. And even if you're not in the game industry yet, I mean, I delivered pizza for Domino's, and I actually took away from that time management, communication, efficient work, and things like that. Stuff you wouldn't think of being a Domino's delivery driver or any kind of like restaurant or retail, but look for those. Like, that's where I've said it is very important to self-reflect and take everything as a learning opportunity, because you'd be surprised at how much you're growing, even though you might be like, oh, that task is grueling, or this is really not what I want to do with my life. Once you take a step back and say, what did I learn from this? What strength did I gain from this? And is there a weakness that I can work on? You will develop to be a stronger person. I mean, I was hugely afraid of public speaking, and I worked towards that. And then I sat at a panel for the first time as a speaker at PAX South just this year.
You enjoy it?
I was terrified, but I did a lot better, and definitely saw the results of me facing that fear and constantly going up against it and wanting to turn my weakness into a strength.
That was lovely. Just a couple of things. You were talking about postmortems. I thought that was a great piece of advice. I will just throw in books. There aren't many, but Blood, Sweat and Pixels is fantastic. There's a couple like that. And of course, there's things like some indie documentaries out there, some quite famous ones, all that sort of stuff, right? It's just, I agree with you. You've got to learn the pipelines before you start. You've got to learn that stuff. Not the pipelines, but you've got to be exposed to how people actually make games. And it's not just the passion, but the process. It's a business after all. And I guess maybe some of that indie stuff that's out there as well you can chase. I was reminded actually just at the end when you was talking about your skills that you learned with Domino's. I remember clearly looking at some CVs when there were just way too many CVs for picking producers, and somebody had said on their CV that they were a lead waiter, and I remember picking them for an interview because I thought, if you've been a lead waiter for a couple of years, my God, you've learned a lot of skills that you're going to need with production. Everything from resilience to dealing with people to communications to, just all that sort of thing. It's amazing. You can learn those soft skills in a lot of other jobs, and you're never going to just walk out of college without having faced some of those and be able to really handle production, I think. I think it's very difficult. So what's your next 5 years looking like?
So I definitely think in the short term, I'm definitely going to achieve the producer title that I've been clamoring for. But I actually really am interested in looking more into creative director and figuring out, like, what are the responsibilities there? Where could my strengths benefit, and where do my weaknesses lie, and kind of research that, because I have limited exposure to creative director, but it's something that I just feel like my experience, my game knowledge, my industry knowledge, and just my willingness to empower creatives, that creative director probably long-term is something that I could probably thrive in.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I'll tell you what, I'll you just reminded me, I've written that down now, but I was going to interview some creative directors because it's a very interesting part of production that you wouldn't normally think was part of production, but it really tends to be from there, that creative directors can emerge. So I think I'll interview a few and see what they think.
Excellent. I can't wait to listen to those. Great, wouldn't it? That's going to be awesome.
So I'm going to ask you really a final question, because we've talked for a long time. It's been great, but what do you wish I had asked you?
Are there any aspects of development that I didn't know or understand before getting into production?
That's a great question. What's the answer?
How every little thing affects something.
Interdependencies.
Because a programmer, for example, will be working on a brand new feature that you would think would just be floating in its own little space, and come to find out when you get to QA or even reviewing it, that it broke something that was made years ago. And then you have to worry about those risks as well, especially, and I don't think it's unique to an older product, but you have 15 years of code that has also been touched by several different types of people, that it could be interwoven in ways that you don't even expect. So it's just kind of like, no matter how small something is, it's going to affect something else, and you just need to be ready for that.
That's an incredibly good point. It's like, you don't quite understand that the butterfly effect occurs within a tiny ecosystem that is your game, and you just don't understand about the horrible maelstrom that you've just caused with this innocent little tweak or bug fix or that's really true. And I think, I was talking to somebody about that today actually, and it's something where a producer needs to learn that to fail fast, right? And also to learn, like that person said about you being heroic champion of the team, because you simply cannot predict a lot of this stuff. You can try, and you can have the best brains in your teams who are very clever veteran people going, no, it should all be fine. And then you'll go out and they'll be, oh God, yeah, that bloody module from 10 years ago, or that part of the game no one even thought about. And you can never predict everything, which is why you need tight teams who feel supported and producers who are caring about people and going, don't worry about it. Yeah, no one could have predicted that. And all then doing all of the wrapping around work to make it right again and to serve the community and the players as well. And I think that's where producers have got such a rich tapestry of like opportunity to learn so many different things in so many different areas, and why producers tend to end up climbing up to the top of the ladder in the end because of that experience, because they've done it the hard way, and they understand the different parts of the team and the different individuals. So I don't know why I'm talking particularly, because that was your question, but I thought it was really interesting what you said.
No, it's wonderful. It's the knowledge share of it all.
Yeah, it is. So thank you ever so much. I'm just really, really grateful to you, Renee, and I compliment you on what has been a really interesting chat. You've got a lot to say that makes a lot of sense, and I hope it helps people, and I hope they found it interesting. Is there a beautiful farewell message you would like to give to the boys and girls?
I really appreciate everybody taking the time to listen, even if it might be uncomfortable with certain topics, and just be kind to one another, and just remember that everybody's trying to do their best with everything that they do, and we're allowed to make mistakes. And as long as you put in the effort to work forward to be the best you can be, then no one can fault you for that.
Thanks for listening. As always, we really appreciate your thoughts and feedback about the show. You can reach out to us by visiting game-production.com's podcast pages and leaving comments under each episode. We have a Facebook group, and YouTube channel that you can find linked from the website. If you want to contribute or fancy a chat in the future, we'd love to hear from you.